G'day, I'm Sean and welcome to the CarExpert Podcast. We're back for another week and it's been a bad week if you're a BMW dealer. But it's been a great week if you've been an automotive journalist, hasn't it, boys? How are you?
There has been a lot of news breaking, from Ford pricing to BMW Stop Sales to the stuff you're about to break down here.
Yes. Yes. James, how are you doing?
I'm not bad. I'm not on a lot of sleep this morning. I was at an early morning event, but we can talk about more later, I think.
Yes, you're talking. We're going to talk about the caddies at Chatty this morning.
Yeah, caddies at Chatty. That's a good way of putting it, yeah.
But first, we're going to dive into the big hits on the CarExpert.com.au website this week. The aging Nissan Navara is finally getting a long overdue tech update to its interior, but for some reason it's not coming to Australia. Photos from Thailand show a heavily revised interior that brings the Navara into line with other Nissan products, including what appears to be a similar screen to the SUV twins of the Nissan X-Trail and the Mitsubishi Outlander. Whilst not a groundbreaking update, the change would be welcome to the Australian model's ancient infotainment system. However, a Nissan Australia spokesperson said there are currently no plans for this vehicle in Australia. The next generation of the Navara is due sometime in the near future, likely to be sharing a platform with a recently updated Mitsubishi Triton. With General Motors' luxury brand Cadillac arriving in Australia, questions are being asked why our V8-loving nation won't be getting the mighty Escalade. A spokesperson for GM International told CarExpert that Cadillac is going to be an EV-only business in Australia. Customers who want a V8-powered SUV will have to settle for the GMC Yukon, basically a less luxury version of the Escalade, but a more luxury version of the Chevrolet Suburban, which the vehicles are based on. Part of the reason for the hesitation from GM is conversion. The EV caddies destined for Down Under are built on the Ultium platform, a platform that is capable of being built in left or right-hand drive. Currently, the Suburban, Yukon and Escalade are all built exclusively left-hand drive. However, the Yukon is being imported and converted locally by GMSV. Now, James, you went and had a look at the caddies in Chatty this morning.
Well, just one caddy.
The caddy in Chatty, which is what's built on this new platform, is the Lyric. So just tell us a little bit about what you saw this morning.
Yeah, so the Lyric is a new mid-size electric SUV from Cadillac. So I think what they're going to do is try and aim it squarely at something like the BMW iX or the Mercedes-Benz EQE SUV. It's quite out there in terms of the design. Like, I think we were talking about it last week. There's a lot of signature Cadillac design features, but it's obviously a very new take and a future-facing version of it. So there's a lot of like really angular bits. The lighting signatures are really distinctive, and there's lots of animations to the lights as well. So it's got these cool startup sequences where it's almost like the lights are like a waterfall sort of falling down. And you know, there's a really nice interior. It's got that massive conjoined screen, which looks really, really high-end and swish. But at the moment, we still don't know what they're doing with pricing and specifications yet. We don't know how many different variants there are going to be. We're still waiting for Cadillac, Australia and New Zealand to start announcing local details. I believe part of that will come with the opening of the first store in Sydney at the beginning of October. So I think from there, that's when orders will open. So between now and then, we'll get pricing and spec, orders will open, then we'll get a clearer view of when those cars are coming to Australia. But the car that is on display in Chatston for the next 2 weeks is factory right-hand drive. It's the first one that's come here, basically was taken from the airport and plonked in the middle of the shopping centre. So it's pretty cool to see it up close.
Now, one of the things with the Cadillac, when they first sort of announced they were going to come here, there was 3 models that were touted as coming here, the Lyric being one of them, the Escalade IQ being the other one. Which
Escaladic.
Exactly. Which is a fully electric version of the Escalade. But I mean, there's a bit of hesitation even with that coming to Australia now, isn't there?
Look, GM and a lot of American brands are notoriously conservative with the media. It used to be a running joke in the industry that you would speak to Ford, for example, and they would just play the straightest bat. They could open the batting for Australia in a test match. Caddy, based on what we understand, is looking at a couple of models. One of them is the Optic, which is another electric SUV to sit below the Lyric we're getting.
Presumably that has a Q in it as well?
Yes, but at the end, not the start.
Okay, right.
Otherwise it'd be the Quoptic. The Escalade IQ is the other one that we think is hopefully coming to Australia, but until they are locked in for production, they have build slots, they have pricing, they have all that stuff, I'd be very surprised if GM announces it. And that, I would imagine, is partly because that is just how these American companies roll. It's got to go through 19 layers of executive vice president before it can be ticked off. But I would imagine with GM as well, there's a fear of saying one thing to the Australian public and then doing another thing, given its history with Holden here.
Yes, well, and it's probably a bit of a sour note for a lot of buyers, although the people that they're targeting the Lyric at are probably not the same ones that were buying Commodores back in the day.
Can't imagine there's a heap of VE SS Commodores being traded in for this $100 and however many $1,000 electric SUV.
Yeah, although if I do see a traded in one, I'm going to remind you of this moment.
Please call me out.
All right, well, let's move on to BMW. It's been a bit of a tough week if you do work for a BMW dealership. It was a tough Friday night for you, Scott, because you were here quite late trying to mop up the tears coming from the salespeople, but and get the story straight.
I don't know if that's quite how it went, but yes.
No, but it was late. I mean, I know you're trying to rush out to the footy, but you were still here well after 6 trying to talk to spokespeople from BMW to get a sense of what's actually going on. So can you tell us what's happened here?
Yeah, so on Thursday this week, Jordan in our news team broke the news that BMW had a stop sale across a huge range of its model lines, everything from X1 through to X7 and including the new 5 Series, I think, as well. And the word from BMW dealers that we spoke with was they weren't allowed to deliver cars across any of those model lines, and it had been going on for a couple of weeks. That's obviously a big problem if you're a dealer. You want to get these cars out the door so you've got room for more stock coming in. You've got angry customers waiting, but it was down to an issue with the brake system. Essentially something in the integrated braking system that manages brake force across the car wasn't working the way that it should have, and that could lead to reduced braking performance. Now, there are no reported instances of this causing an accident in Australia. It's not like there are BMWs rear-ending other cars on the road left and right.
Well, not because of that reason anyway. We can't speak for the drivers.
Driver error if we were talking Formula One. But obviously it's a very serious safety issue. A couple of BMWs were recalled for that earlier this year, and then later this week, late on Thursday, more than 25,000 cars across BMW Mini and Alpina were recalled to fix this problem. Friday night, and the reason I was still at my desk well after the time I would usually be at the pub, is BMW issued an update to us saying that dealers had a software update and they were able to apply it to cars before delivering them, which meant the stop sale was over. There's an over-the-air update being offered to some of these customers. So the vehicle's been recalled, but theoretically, if your car is over-the-air update enabled, they can give you the new software that solves the problem without seeing a dealer. And that, I suppose, if you are BMW, is good news, even if it was late on a Friday.
Okay, so what you just said raises a really interesting point. Now, traditionally in a car, you would apply the brake pedal and then the master cylinder would use hydraulic fluid to press the pads into the disc, the car would stop, right? Now, short of a pipe bursting or the master cylinder failing, the brakes would generally work on the vehicle, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking extreme circumstances, maybe your brake fluid boils if you're on the track, something like that. But fundamentally, it's a mechanical or a hydraulic system.
Very little to go wrong. Now, what you've just told us is that a software fix fixes this thing with the braking system in the BMW. I mean, does that mean that you applying the brake pedal doesn't necessarily have a direct connection to the brake pads on the wheel?
That is the case in some vehicles with brake-by-wire. I think there is a distinction to be made here, though. The issue isn't so much with what happens when you press the brake pedal, because fundamentally the car still stops. And the idea of electronic systems working with hydraulic braking systems like we've had for a really long time isn't new. That's what ABS is. It detects when the wheel's locking up, it then pulses the brake to make sure that the wheel isn't locked and you get better stopping performance. The system that BMW is talking about here, based on the way it's described in the recall notice, isn't necessarily to do with the fundamental, I brake a little bit, the car brakes a little bit. It's when there's a lot of brake force being applied and you want to stop the car, it shuffles brake force between the brakes, it's integrated with the ABS and that sort of thing. So it's not so much down to the way that a new braking system works, because versions of this have been around for a long time. It seems to be specifically related to the way that that software, which presumably is run a different way in this car to older BMWs, given their software architecture is constantly updating, actually activates or works in extreme situations.
I guess I'm curious, going forward with modern cars, more by-wire systems, you know, we've got fly-by-wire throttles, brake-by-wire, those sort of things.
Steer-by-wire in some cases.
Yeah, exactly. Is this... I mean, could this be a problem where your car is perfectly fine, you get an update just like your computer, and there might be just one, questionable line of code that doesn't work right with everything else, and then all of a sudden your brakes may not work and you're in this recall situation? Like, is this a potential problem going forward?
Look, the thought of that scares the shit out of me, to, I know, be a bit rude, but theoretically, yes. For a long time, infotainment lived in one bucket, and then the ECUs that controlled the car lived in another bucket, and they were quite separate. We're now at a point where these cars are so software driven, and obviously you don't want a million different software systems doing a million different things. You want to integrate them as best as possible. Theoretically, it is possible for software updates in one part of the car to impact other parts of the car, like the braking. I suppose what I would say to avoid being sort of a bit of a scaremonger is car makers are aware of how much risk there is if something does go wrong with the software and something really significant in these cars. And I don't know how many layers of fail-safe there are in the BMW system, but What I would say is I'd be very, very surprised if an infotainment software update is capable of impacting the brakes in the vehicle without a number of different fail-safes there. As much as these systems are integrated, and yes, you can press a button on your touchscreen and it might impact a braking system in the car, I don't know that pressing buttons on the screen is going to be doing things to your brake system. There is still layers of redundancy built in there. And I think that's really crucial, because the first time that something by wire does go haywire and cause a crash, it's going to be the biggest story in the world. So the thought of it is scary. The reality is very different.
I guess same can be said about airplanes. Our most commercial jumbo jets are all fly-by-wire anyway. They still have backup systems. So, okay, well, on the positive note, BMWs are back on sale again, aren't they?
Yeah, being delivered again as of late Friday. There is a recall notice out for quite a lot of cars, including your parents' car, as it turns out.
Yeah, my parents just took delivery of an X1 and their VIN is on the list. But as far as I know, they haven't had any issues with braking as yet. So, like Scott said earlier, some of these recalls, even though they sound like a big deal and there's a lot of cars affected, sometimes it's just one case somewhere in the world that's gone wrong, and then a period of production needs to all be recalled to make sure either the software or the components used are correct. So, yeah, it sounds pretty scary, but at the same time, until we hear like lots of cases of people just being rear-ended or, like having brakes fail, it's probably less of a concern, provided you monitor your vehicle and also make sure that you arrange an appointment with your dealer.
And I guess it says a lot that the stop sale was on for a while and nobody knew about it until last Thursday. So they kept that very quiet.
Well, and shout out to Jordan, who's a member of our news team, for chasing that up with a number of his contacts in the dealer world. It's one of those stories that we sometimes hear about through alternative means, because if you're a PR person, you don't want to get to us, but our journos obviously did some good legwork on that one.
Yes, so proper investigative journalism isn't quite dead yet. All right, let's move on. I want to talk about Ford. We haven't talked about Ford for a while, actually, and normally they're...
Has the F-150 been recalled again?
No, surprisingly
not. We're about something else this time. That's good.
We're talking about Ranger and Everest, because there is a new Ranger and a new Everest called the Tremor. Was it more like an earthquake? I don't really know, but it's...
Want me to shake your chair or something, or will I ruin that?
If you could, although maybe if you live in Newcastle, sorry, that might be a bit too soon. Ranger, Everest and Tremor, a couple of new variants within the Ranger and Everest range, but they're not just like a sticker pack, which I think a few people were concerned they were. So who wants to take it? I'll open it up. Who wants to explain Ranger? Who wants to explain Everest?
I can probably I can start off.
Okay, start off.
The Tremor models seem to be sort of like there was a model from Ford in the previous generation Ranger range.
It was the FX4.
Yeah, so that one. So it's more than just a sticker pack and like an equipment package. It's got actual mechanical upgrades to make it better for certain things. In this case, it's off-roading. So it's almost like a budget Raptor with the turbo diesel engine. So it's almost like the old Raptor, actually.
Well, that job was really easy for them, wasn't it?
Well, in the case of the Ranger anyway. So based off the Sport, it's bi-turbo only. It's got new suspension from Bilstein. It's got underbody protection, off-road tyres, heavy-duty aluminium side steps, and Raptor-esque paint options, including the Conquer Grey, which I think is the colour that Paul has, isn't it?
It is, yeah, which is the joke that I made to Paul, are they going to finish painting it?
Yeah.
That's the one he gets all the time.
Just a primer underneath, isn't it? Yeah.
So yeah, it's meant to be better off-road. It's got better, all the equipment that, people would typically fit aftermarket to make their vehicles more capable. But unlike there was a version of the Ranger last time where the Raptor couldn't actually tow 3.5 tons with all those upgrades on the old bi-turbo one. This one can still tow 3.5 tons and the payload remains pretty much the same. And it looks really tough. Like it's got the decals. It's all quite a subtle but like really nice job that, this would all be factory warranted. It's all meant to be, pretty capable off-road and everything. And I guess, for people who, like myself, who probably couldn't be bothered shopping around with different retailers trying to find the accessories or the upgrades that you want, this obviously gives you a factory solution with, a one-stop shop in terms of buying the car, warranty and all that kind of thing. And it looks pretty tough. And then they've also revealed the Everest version, which I believe is unique so far because there was a Ranger Tremor elsewhere or something like that. There's something similar that's been available overseas for a while.
We've got the F-150 Tremor in the States.
Yeah, and so the Ranger now has that pack, and they also have confirmed the Everest, which will get a V6, based on the Sport V6, I believe, and has very similar upgrades, but obviously the more powerful engine. So two very interesting cars that I believe will probably sell out pretty quickly because they're both fairly limited in their production runs.
I really like that Ford's made the effort with these cars. I know there are a million Rangers and Everests around Melbourne, and you can't go a day without seeing one that someone has done a horrible job modifying. So many people want these cars to be I suppose halfway between something like a Land Cruiser, which is a bit more luxurious and a bit bigger, and a more rugged kind of basic affordable off-roader, and Ford treads that line better than most. Something like this Everest Tremor promises to be a pretty capable thing off-road, but also still has some nice creature comforts, also is more expensive. It's sort of around the $80,000 mark we would expect rather than the $120,000 mark. It's a really cool in-between option for people who can't go quite all the way, even to a top-end Prado these days, but still want a lot of that capability. And if you are the sort of person who's dipping a toe into that world, but doesn't have the knowledge, like you say, to shop around at different places, know what you want, and deal with a world that has some really good reputable sellers, but I would imagine some cowboys as well, or with a factory warranty, it's a pretty unique thing Ford offers.
In terms of like what competes with the Ranger, I mean, you've got the Navara Pro 4X Warrior. It's probably its only real like factory-backed competitor, because if you look at the Hilux range, the Rogue, the GR Sport, like they sort of act as if that they can do off-road, but it's kind of like, the city kid went and bought some steel cap boots and is pretending he can get out in the bush. Yeah,
I think the Tremor is actually probably closer to a Hilux Rogue or a GR Sport in the sense that they're a factory solution, whereas the Navara has been a locally engineered, it's factory backed in terms of the warranty, but it's a locally engineered and remanufactured job. But they're all sort of the same in the sense that unlike the Raptor, which was always billed as a performance model and in the current generation gets that unique twin turbo V6, these ones all use pretty much standard engines and then increase the capability rather than just the outright acceleration performance. So, the Ranger's pretty unique in that it still has that heavy duty towing capacity on top of something like the Navara Pro 4X. But it's obviously a much newer and more refined product as well, which I guess is a real selling point for Ford.
I mean, I personally like that they didn't pick the top spec Ranger to then do this with. I guess the thing is this something that we would like to see more of from other manufacturers of these vehicles? Mitsubishi, well, I guess we sort of said Toyota are doing it, but if Toyota did this with the SR5 as opposed to being a top spec thing, do you think that's probably more appealing to the buyer now, given prices are through the roof, cost of living is really expensive?
I think anything that gives buyers more choice is a good thing. I know that's a bit of a vague kind of answer, but I suppose the challenge towards that is money. Ford has a lot of these parts that it's developed for the Wildtrak X, which was the more expensive car that this has sort of brought some of the tech down from. It's also just got scale with the Ranger that very few brands can match. Not only does it sell it here in huge numbers, I know the Hilux is big in Thailand, but the Ranger is also quite a big seller in the States, and they get a different version of the car. But a lot of these parts can be used around the Ford world in a way that maybe Mitsubishi can't with a Triton Special Edition for Australia. I think the other thing with this Ranger that's quite unique about it is the Australian impact and the development that's gone on it. The Hilux, although it does have Australian input, and vehicles like the Rogue and the Rugged X have been quite heavily engineered in Australia, the way that Ford has developed this Ranger has Australian fingerprints all over it. And that means that our market gets priority when it comes to things like that, and we have some sway in a way that maybe Mitsubishi, for example, just doesn't when it goes to head office and says, we want to bring another special edition Triton to Australia. So as much as we'd like to see more of it, Ford's in quite a unique position being able to offer these, and Toyota's done a little bit of it with the Rugged and the Rogue, but even they're different things. They're fundamentally re-engineered new models, not, I suppose, upgrades fitted to an existing model that give it more capability at quite a reasonable price.
All right, well, if you want to know more about the Everest Tremor, there is a video and a write-up on CarExpert.com.au and on our YouTube channel, and we have a review of the Tremor, a Ranger Tremor coming out on Thursday. I think the embargo is 9 a.m. Thursday morning, so we'll have a full written review and a video review on the YouTube channel, so make sure you check that out. All right, we're going to talk about our review car this week.
Yes.
It's slightly different to a Ranger Tremor or an Everest Tremor in that it's about half the size. It is the Jimny XL. I mean, what do you say about this car? I mean, the Jimny was sort of all the car you needed it to be, but then they decided we'll add 2 more doors and call it the XL, right?
It's a very different car to the 2-door because that 2-door is made in Japan. They do a K-car version and then they slap some fender flares on it and give Australia a different version. This car is actually made in India. Suzuki, under its Maruti sort of partnership, has a massive market share over there, and India's full of quite small SUVs that fit a lot of people and a lot of stuff in them. There are 7-seat versions of cars like the Kia Seltos, for example, over there. So a 4-door Jimny for that market, rugged, affordable, more spacious inside than the 2-door, so you can get the family in there, makes a heap of sense. It also helps that in markets like Australia, that two-door is really popular, but you can't really get your friends in the back and you can't get stuff in the boot, and that limits its appeal. So on top of the play for the Indian market, locally, it just sort of shapes as an option where you look at the two-door and go, I love it, but I just cannot get my kids to clamber through there. I can't fit the school bags in the boot, or I can't get my off-road gear in there for a weekend away and have friends. Now they've got an option that suits those people.
That's implying the Jimny owners have friends. They want to carry around.
We work with a Jimny owner. I'm going to tell Jack you said that.
That's right. He should watch the podcast, so he should know that I've said it. Look, I guess for all its pros of extra doors, the con comes in the fact they haven't increased the engine output at all. James, do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so it's still the same 1.5 litre naturally aspirated petrol engine that's in the standard car, and it comes with either a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed auto, so pretty dated tech.
With overdrive.
Wow, yes. Well, I remember my 2000 model Honda CR-V had overdrive, and it was not really a substitute for 5 or 6 gears. Yeah, so it's got like 80 kilowatts or even less.
75.
There you go, 75 kilowatts. Not, I wouldn't even mention the torque because there's not enough of it to talk about. And, if adding that extra weight in the body, like we did a couple of runs to do car swaps in that, and there was like 3 full-size blokes in it. And
well, that's what Jack is. He's still doing the car swap.
Yeah, it was just from sitting in as a passenger, it felt quite laboured. Like it rides probably a little bit better because of that longer wheelbase, but beyond that, like a lot of people ask me about Jimnys because people love the look. Especially a lot of young people. They go, I want a little off-roader, can't afford a Wrangler. Like the Suzuki looks really, really cool. And while they're awesome and quite characterful, I think that people need to understand that they're fine in town and they're great off-road. But then there's that section in between town and off-road.
To get to the off-road.
Yeah. Exactly right. And Australia is such a big, wide landscape where you have to travel a long way to get to some of these off-road trails and these campsites. And Jack will tell you, given he's from a very long way away from Melbourne, that driving these things on the freeway for extended periods of time, even with the safety tech that Suzuki puts in it, which is commendable, is quite tiresome. So a 4-speed auto spinning at nearly 3,000 revs and a vehicle that can sometimes get blown around by the wind is not fun.
Driving it through a storm it's like trying to drive a tall ship. You sort of feel it rock from side to side as the wind hits, and we're making it out like it's dangerous. It's not. You can very easily do it, but just compared to any other normal SUV you would buy for 35 grand, like this thing, you are working so much harder because it's tall and skinny and has very flat sides, and you get crosswinds and buffeted from trucks and that sort of thing. So you're busy, which is fun, but it's also not a relaxing car to drive from sort of 60 kilometres upwards.
Especially if you're not an enthusiast like us. Like for us, we can see a vehicle's flaws and be like, oh, that's fine. But you think of a lot of normal people that see the look and they're like, oh yeah, this will be really nice. But then they probably sit between that and maybe like a Kona, something equivalent that's more car-based, and it's like night and day in terms of the refinement and the everyday usability. So that's, while the Jimny is a very capable car, and in Paul's video, he did some pretty gnarly off-roading and it was very good. It's just something that it's still a specialist vehicle. It's got a very specific intended purpose, and so unless you're going to use it for that, I'd perhaps make sure that you test drive it and make sure that it fits your needs.
I mean, it is 35 grand, which is, well, thereabouts $35,000, which is remarkably good value in the current day and age of cars. However, for what you get, it's not necessarily the best value. And look, for as an example, the car I learned to drive in was a Suzuki Sierra U.
Cool.
Which is basically, this was from the early 80s. I think we paid $3 grand for it.
So this without the rear canopy.
Basically, yeah, it was 4 on the floor. I didn't have a second or fourth gear by the time we got it. It was just first or third. You couldn't get it out of 4-wheel drive. It was just stuck permanently in 4-wheel drive.
This explains how you drive your Falcon.
Yes. It was brilliant. And I honestly, I think everyone should at least, you know how they used to say you have to own an Alfa Romeo to be a proper car enthusiast? I feel like everyone should have to drive a Suzuki Sierra or a Suzuki Jimny at some point in their life to appreciate driving, because that is one thing about the Jimny. I feel it is the essence of driving a car, right? It sort of takes you back to the pure basics and fundamentals.
It's very poetic of you.
I
mostly agree with you. I do think, though, because it is so small and so light and so relatively for an off-roader affordable, it's sort of a little bit in between with the automatic. With the manual, I totally agree, because you are busy, you're constantly changing gears. It's got the old school sort of rubber gusset on the floor with the manual shifter. It's quite a long shifter. Feels like you're driving a cut price Land Cruiser 70 almost, just with you've got to be deliberate with your movements. With the auto, it doesn't quite feel like that. And I completely understand if you're sitting in traffic or you're spending a lot of time in the car, the auto makes sense. But where the manual feels like a real throwback, you're busy, you're driving, the auto kind of just feels like a bit of an underpowered sort of box sometimes. It definitely loses a chunk of that charm, and to me at least, because I can drive a manual, it kind of goes from a car that really makes me feel good and I look forward to driving to something that you endure a little bit more. I get that not everyone can drive a manual or wants to, and it's still a charming thing, but I think that real like enthusiast charm does get a little bit diluted with that auto.
I guess the thing to Suzuki's credit is that their whole marketing shtick at the moment is for fun's sake, right? And I think Suzuki are doing a really good job at the moment with, Jimny XL, new Swift. Like they're really nailing just fun, happy little cars, right?
Absolutely, and we're starting to see a return to form from them in terms of the pricing as well. When the Jimny first came out, it was like a sub 30 grand thing, and then the prices inflated, and you'll see dealers still flogging them now. But they've sort of managed to free up supply a little bit, and it means that wait times and pricing is sort of stabilised. And I think the Swift is another great example, and even the Vitara to an extent. Hopefully, with the update that's coming next year, they'll bring it down the pricing a little bit. But yeah, you're right. They have that really fun, enjoyable, back to basics feel about them that I think is really charming. And the Jimny is a prime example of it doesn't need to be perfect, but it still can be a lot of fun. I personally would go for the manual over the auto purely because of the involvement and it's a more cohesive feel around, you get the transmission whine and all that kind of stuff and all the noises and the mechanical bits. But you can see why people love them. They're charming, they're cute, they're still pretty well featured and they're relatively attainable. And that's always been a Suzuki hallmark. So hopefully as time goes on, we've got emission standards and all sorts of things coming into the frame now that, some brands are not able to justify continuing their special formulas in their products. I think Suzuki's done a pretty good job of keeping it together for the last little bit, and hopefully moving forward, it stays the same.
All right, well, before I ask you the final question about the Jimny, here's just a couple of things. So it has a 37-degree approach angle, a 47-degree departure angle. It's basically flat on the back. That is unbelievable. 210 milligram clips, but only a 300 millimeter wading depth, which is, I don't know, that might be a fear thing. I'm sure that they can go a little bit more than that, but you put a snorkel on if you want to go proper full driving.
Well, that's one of the huge bits of appeal for the Jimny. It's, I suppose, similar to a Ranger or a Hilux in that there's a massive aftermarket for them already in Australia, and if you're willing to look further, there are so many people online who have dressed their Jimny up with bits from Japan, for example, where they've got a massive catalogue. You can kind of take it and turn it into anything you want, from a wannabe G-Wagon like Albors has with his, all the way through to a really rugged little off-roader with better ground clearance, better wading, and some really tough-looking tyres. The only thing I would say is big wheels, big tyres, and not much torque already will mean you really have to keep your foot in.
And more crosswind
yes, exactly.
misbehaviour, yes. All right, so you guys, money on the table. Would you be going the 3-door or the 5-door?
3-door.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to say more there.
I can. I was trying to figure out. Yeah, I think that with the 3-door, that's sort of like the signature thing. It's actually the same way I feel about most of these old school off-roaders. You look at even the previous Prado had a 3-door in Japan. The Pajero had a 3-door version. The Defender has a 3-door version. And there's something really cool about those cars. They don't need to be massive and extended wheelbase and all that kind of stuff. So for me, the traditional Jimny is a 3-door. Short wheelbase, and that would probably be the one I'd get in that khaki green colour. The
canvas roof over the back.
Not even just the new one with the hard top. I like to keep my cabin enclosed. But yeah, I think that definitely the 3-door manual for me.
Yep. Scott?
I'm exactly the same as James. I would go the Jimny Lite, which is the absolute most basic version. I'm not buying a Jimny as a first car. It's going to be a toy regardless, and if that's the case, you might as well buy the one that's the most fun, which is a 2-door manual.
Well, are you looking for a great deal on a Suzuki Jimny?
Well, have I got a deal for you? Well, actually, I have a page full of them. All you need to do is go to Google, type in Help Me Car Expert, or use the QR code on the screen. It's going to take you to the CarExpert website. We're a big company. It's like over 60 full-time employees. Very impressive. We also have a page on the site with all of the deals going in Australia this month to help you figure out which car you need to pick. We can then even put you in touch with one of our friendly dealers who might even be able to get you a better deal as well. So go to Google, type in Help Me Car Expert, or whip your phone out, scan the QR code, and away you go.
All right, it wouldn't be a Car Expert podcast without our picks of the week. So James, I know you've got one. It relates to what we've been talking about, so take it away.
Yeah, so off the back of the Jimny discussion, Sean and I came across this really cool video of someone who, speaking of all the modifications that are available for a Jimny, he's turned it into a little Tykes Fisher-Price thing. So it's got the yellow and red paint job and all the related colour scheme and some other upgrades. And he's got a really cool walk-around video of it on social media, which was just a good bag of laughs.
Yeah, he's decimated the approach angle by putting a big white splitter on the front. But it does look really cool, and it is the kind of car that lends itself to doing things like that, doesn't it? So if you've modified your Jimny, write to us, leave a comment or write to us podcast@carexpert.com.au and send us a picture. Scott, what's your pick this week?
It's not a Fisher-Price Jimny.
Oh, okay.
I have gone to the world of motorsport this week, and I got this video on my Instagram feed of a trophy truck. It's hammering through the desert. I want to say somewhere Baja. I don't know though. And you can just see the body sitting perfectly flat as each wheel works underneath. This car is flying, and there's people reaching out in front of it, trying to get a video of it coming down and waiting as late as possible to get out of the way, kind of Group B style. It all looks incredibly sketchy, but those cars are so impressive.
Yeah, you sent me the video, and it's like the wheels move and the cabin doesn't.
It's like floating, isn't it?
But yeah, it's like the suspension travel on them is phenomenal. It sort of defies physics when it does. Yeah. Mine is actually from our news editor, William Stopford, who has been to Cadillac, the Lyric launch in the States over the past week or so.
Yeah, call it week.
So he got a bit of a tour at the GM facilities there, and he took a photo inside the GM wind tunnel. I'll put a photo on the screen, and I'll link to his social media as well in the show notes, so you can check it out. But I asked him about it, and he said that it's the biggest wind tunnel fan anywhere in North America, possibly the world. Well, it's America, so it's definitely the world, right? But instead of using carbon fiber blades, they use wooden, like timber blades. They said the reason is if something blows off the car, which shows they have a lot of confidence in their pre-production cars, it won't damage the blades. It will actually just sort of bounce off it. Whereas if you use carbon fiber, the blades could then potentially shatter.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then do more damage. Because if you know anything about a wind tunnel, it doesn't blow, it sucks. So yes, I see it in your face, yes. But yeah, absolutely phenomenal mega things, and car wind tunnels, we don't really have them in Australia, but they are absolutely phenomenal things. And to see such a giant fan, I think it would, like you could power the space shuttle with the space.
It's fascinating the scale of the stuff that some of these global corporations have, and in America where everything's supersized, like that kind of facility would just be so cool. So props to Will for capturing that stuff, and I hope you had a good time.
Yes, indeed. I hope you're not too jet lagged when you get back, mate. That pretty much brings us to the end this week, guys. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up? I know you've got a busy couple of weeks ahead.
Yeah, if you see someone from CarExpert on the road, give them a hug. There is a lot of travel going on in this next couple of weeks and a lot of new vehicle launches. So it's a really exciting time to be just in the industry in general, but especially here. But you're going to see a lot of really busy CarExpert people running around very soon.
Now, just a heads up, we are going to record our next podcast early, so if there's any breaking news that comes out by the time it goes live, apologies, we've had to record it early because James is going on a little trip, aren't you?
Yes, I'm going to Seoul next week to drive the new Kia EV3, which I'm very, very excited about. I believe we're on the first wave of the global launch, so I'll be there with the Europeans and potentially the Brits as well. And we'll be getting a proper road drive on Korean roads of the EV3. So hopefully I come back with some details for the Australian market as well, because I know that that's going to be their new entry-level electric product. It's got some really big range claims, and if they can price it right, I imagine they'll get a lot of interest from Australian buyers. So watch this space.
And while you're there, ask them when we're getting an EV5, because we've been waiting a while now.
Yes, I'll be sure to ask that question as well.
Well, thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you boys for joining me as always. If you have enjoyed the podcast, leave a comment, give us some feedback on whatever streaming platform you're listening to us on. And if you have any feedback for us, write to us, podcast@carexpert.com.au. We'd love to hear it. Send us a photo of your modified Jimny. We know there's a heap of them out there. But until next time, have a good one.